everybody. I'm Vinny Murphy.
I'm Christiaan Kutlick.
And welcome to another episode of Unstable Reactor from Dissecting Fiction, where we pick some oddities that either Christiaan or I are familiar with, and the other one isn't, and we kind of discuss our reactions to these. Well, right now they've been pretty much films, but they really could be any piece of fiction. And Christiaan picked a really interesting one for me to watch completely cold.
Yes, I picked Angel's Egg, which is an experimental Japanese anime movie. Technically, it's an OVA, which means original video anime, which means basically it was released on videotape back in the 90s. That's that's generally what that means. Because there's a whole genre of that kind of anime. Because from the 80s to 90s, they just kind of released anything on videotape. And there's just a whole genre of short anime films based on that. This was created by Yoshitaka Amano and directed by Momura Oshii. And these are two pretty big names in the Japanese anime world. Yoshitaka Amano is best known for doing the concept art for the Final Fantasy series. And you see a lot of that influence in this film itself. And then Oshii is best known for directing Ghost in the Shell, the original movie, not the shows or anything. And this film is supposed to be the collaboration between each other. They basically had carte blanche to do whatever they wanted on this film. And it's only about an hour and 15 minutes long. And it's really, really experimental. It's supposed to be post-apocalyptic. And there's maybe 20 lines of dialogue across the whole film. Yoshi originally came up with this film shortly after losing his faith in Christianity, allegedly. Supposedly, he was a big Catholic before this, and he studied a lot of religion, and a lot of that influenced his later works. And he put a lot of that self-introspection into this. This was released in 1985, so this is about 10 years before Ghost of the Shell even came out across the world.
Yeah, it's interesting. I literally knew nothing about what I was about to watch. I put aside 2 hours just assuming it might be a feature. Christiaan literally just gave me a name and told me it was on YouTube. So I really didn't know what I was in for. One of the few things I did have I don't even think it's really spoiled for me, was the year it came out, because the video posted had 1985 on it. One of the first things I did notice was that it does hold this style that was kind of popular around that time of taking technology and making it look organic. Now that I know that one of the designers who worked on the Final Fantasy series was involved, that makes a lot of sense. It was funny, though, because when I actually looked at it, I was thinking more Giger, Mobius, sort of European 80s art, but I definitely see what it ended up turning into.
Yeah, they seem to take a lot of influence from that kind of weird Giger stuff. I think there was some influence from Alien and Aliens on this, some of the design work. But it was just kind of whatever was directly from their imagination. Even the city they're in looks a lot like France. A lot of that weird kind of closed streets, cobblestone, and that kind of Art Nouveau architecture. And
I definitely did pick up on the post-apocalyptic intention of it. It's kind of hard to describe if you haven't seen it, but there's very, very, very little dialogue in this. So you really are sort of interpreting everything as you're watching it. I would say thematically, from what is on screen, essentially, I mean, if you want to say plot, the crux of the plot is a young girl carrying around an egg, and she will not answer many questions about it, but she's also often holding it in a position where it looks as if she's pregnant. So what I drew from this, and this is me working with very little dialogue, watching an art film, is it's a theme about destruction and rebirth, kind of constantly happening, and how people's lives are really defined by their roles within that. Obviously, she's some sort of representation of rebirth. There's also a male character with her. I don't think anyone's ever named, if I'm correct. They ask each other who they are, and they don't respond. It's also this weird thing that when they talk to each other, their eyes are completely emotionless, which is really off-putting. It's bizarre. because everything else is so ornate and like developed, and then their eyes just don't move. But this male figure who is with her carries a cross with him, and my sort of interpretation, which if you're just telling me that this guy was struggling with his, belief at this point, would make a lot of sense, is that he's seeing this Christ figure leading everyone to the next step, but it's this like constant cycle of destruction and rebirth.
Yeah, I would kind of agree to that. Oshii himself kind of admitted that there's like not really a story to this. This is more like just emotions on film. He described it as animated art rather than a story. So like he never came down and gave like a concrete explanation of what's going on because he's very like adamant about like reader interpretation rather than like artist interpretation. He's very much death of the author type of guy.
You have to take what you can from what little, like, dialogue wise, almost between the two characters, I think it's almost irrelevant, aside from the fact that they don't know where they came from and they don't know where they're going, which I think seems like a very personal comment from the writer about not knowing what your role is in reality and reality being so much larger than you. I also think that this sort of obsession with destruction is really the only driving force, because one of the few things you get is the male character recounting the story of Noah.
Yeah, it's interesting that you like picked up on this idea of like destruction and rebirth because that's very present throughout like a lot of the Japanese story, but it's always like here is kind of like there's a weird like Christian twist to it, just like you pointed out with this guy with the cross, that he's like leading these guys to destruction.
The end shows the girl dying after the egg has apparently hatched, but then you see a bunch more eggs spawn up, and that guy is like standing there waiting to restart the process, which is interesting sort of view. If we are saying that this character is supposed to be some kind of Christ figure, is that a comment on the idea that, yes, there are like messianic figures, but all they're really doing is just...
It's kind of weird because like it's implied that he breaks the egg and everything, even though he's constantly asking her what's inside the egg, and she says she doesn't know, and she's like insisting that the egg's alive, even though the guy with the cross says adamantly like the egg is not alive, it's dead, it's been dead. So there's this kind of like weird idea of like either this guy like leading her like out of faith or into faith, because at the end she's part of like this giant like robot eye thing. It's just like one of the statues on it. Like it's a really strange film. It's like it's kind of impossible to describe. You kind of just have to watch it.
Interesting though, because it's like you totally threw me off because like I said, I had no idea what I was about to watch, and then when no one talked for 5 minutes, I'm like, oh, what did he give me? But it is beautiful. Like it's really interesting to watch. You get the impression that anything that happens in it is 100% intentional because it's pretty sparse on action or like anything. Like everything you see has some importance. I always think when someone writes any kind of story, even if they're saying they're trying to avoid like a real plot or like a definite interpretation, there's always something in the back of their head. From Josie and the Pussycats to Ethan Frome, like it's there. And I think here, as you said, he was dealing with a lot of like issues with his own beliefs. I think that's really what this is him obsessing over a destruction and trying to figure out how anything can really be true within that environment.
That's interesting. That's what you saw in it, because I saw this mainly as a criticism of like faith itself. Because a lot of this is like everybody kind of has blind faith in something, but they're not really sure why. Like the girl with the egg knows it's going to hatch, but she doesn't really know why, because everyone admits there aren't like animals around. And there's all these like fishermen in the town that like stand perfectly still until like a shadow of the fish like comes across the town. And then everybody starts like trying to chase it and catch it, but it's like a shadow, they can't catch it. And then the soldier with the cross himself, and to say it's a cross is like it looks like a giant gun. Like if you ever saw Trigun, it's just like a giant metal cross. It's really like awesome to look at.
Yeah, it's a really interesting design.
And he doesn't even know what's really going on. He tells like this weird story, like about Noah, in that Noah's Ark was traveling, and then when they sent out the dove to find land, the dove never returned. So everybody on the Ark forgot what they were supposed to be doing because they were just out there in seas for like hundreds and hundreds of years. I'm not sure if that's like a criticism of like Earth itself or something, or religion. You kind of see like what you want to see on your own, but what is clear is that everything kind of turns out horribly wrong afterwards.
I don't disagree that it's a criticism on religion, but I also think that to bring it full circle, which is essentially what it does image-wise, he has to create, like, there has to be some sort of order that we're not 100% perceiving. And that's the one thing that I think I think a little differently on, is I think the male character is kind of manipulative. I think he does know what's going on. And maybe that's like the representation of religion, where it's like, yeah, there is knowledge out there that could be obtained, but the pieces that are moving everything are getting in your way and you're never going to know. Like,
It's interesting you see that he has some idea what's going on, because I kind of see it as like he's taking orders from this like giant robot eye in the sky, but like it's an eye, it can't tell him anything. It's a very little interpretation.
like I said, I went into this totally cold and just have like a bunch of notes that I wrote down. And like, I guess if I'm casting him as the Christ figure, then we're casting the eye as God. And like, this is like a corrupted Christ figure, like a Messiah that does what it's supposed to do, but isn't what you want a Messiah to do.
To be clear, like this guy might not even be a Christ figure. He just might be like some agent of the church too. He doesn't necessarily have to be Jesus or anything.
Or he might not even be anything. We're just like, there's not enough information to really analyze it.
Right. No, this is, to be clear, this is like watching like animated art. Like you're just like looking at a Dali painting and trying to like coming up with your own interpretations of.
The one thing I would say though is it seems like everyone has a pretty consistent, or I shouldn't say everyone, us, and from what you've read, a lot of people seem to have a very consistent view that there is supposed to be some kind of connection to this guy holding a cross, and the fact that the only thing you get any real like specific reference to is religion. Like, I think everyone's ideas are going to kind of flow out of that no matter what you do.
Right, because like the longest piece of dialogue is like a guy talking about Noah's Ark, and that's like almost all the dialogue you get in this whole film. And the only other lines are like, "Who are you?" Like two characters saying, literally telling each other, "Who are you?" No, who are you? And that's the whole scene.
Yeah, and that's where I pulled that whole idea of like identity being like important, but also just part of whatever you're experiencing. Because I think to us, the viewer, their identities are the main characters in this story, and she has an egg. And like that's their identity, and then it ends. And I don't know, is it a comment on filmmaking? This is crazy. I gave you a Degrassi TV special. You gave me this, like, now I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah, this very abstract art film.
Yeah.
I do find. Have you ever read Silence? It's also like another Japanese like novel.
I have not.
Martin Scorsese did a film on it. It did not. It's like his only film that did not win the Oscars. But Silence is like another movie about like a Japanese man like losing faith in Christianity, and I find a lot of parallels between those two of work, because like neither of them like criticize the faith. They both kind of criticize like the church and like blind faith. And that's something that I always found kind of interesting. Like whenever like I find in Japanese art, they criticize like religion is never like the religion itself, is always like the institution.
Right, and I think I would argue that for the most part, I think that it's a lot of Western storytelling does the same. You know, it always seems like, you know, Star Wars, they're not criticizing the idea that, you know, the Force isn't out there. They're criticizing the idea that everything got so clouded with the military and with government that, you know, you could no longer cut through it. I think it may be more prevalent in Eastern culture, but I think that's a pretty basic criticism of religion. But I would agree that it is maybe overtly more common in like Japanese, even other East Asian art.
Right. So what did you think of the film itself, like outside of your interpretation of it?
Oh, I enjoyed it. I mean, it's really fun to watch. It's just interesting. It's not too long, which I think could have been really bad. I think if this had gone 2 hours, I would have like been really mad at you.
No, yeah, it would have been torturous. It's already like it feels a bit stretched at that point. Like, did you like that scene where he's just sitting by the fire for like 4 minutes?
Oh yeah, and the last shot be like what is I think it lasts like almost 2 minutes, and it's literally just the camera pulling back.
Yeah, you can kind of skip forward 5 seconds on that film.
Yeah.
But what it
Yeah.
pans out to is really interesting.
Yeah, I did enjoy it. Like I can't act like I didn't. And the truth is, I often don't enjoy art films. Ask me about Eraserhead someday. This I thought was, like you said, it's more of a visual art piece than it is a narrative. But you're super intrigued to try to figure out what the hell they were trying to say in that narrative.
Right, and then like all the designs themselves are really interesting. Like the girl that's kind of featured as the protagonist in this like looks really interesting in of itself. Like everybody's white and has like pale hair. Like everybody looks like zombies. Like even the tanks they made looks really interesting, and it's just like a tank.
And she's often in stark contrast to the background, where she's very like pale white colors and the backgrounds are very dark or greenish reddish tone, so she always pops off of the screen.
Even like the guy with the cross and everything too. It's just like a very like they put a lot of thought on like each frame of this.
Yeah, it's I mean, check it out. What was your impression by those listings that are on YouTube? Do you feel like they're official at all or no? I couldn't tell.
No, they're not official. They're definitely not official. Don't tell any Japanese company about this.
Yeah. Shh. There are versions available. That's something I did quickly look up before this. I think they're mostly not our region. I think they're mostly out of print, was the impression I got.
Because like with the OVA market, like I was saying at the beginning of this, like there was a whole market of just like videotapes of these kinds of films, like of just like these small studios just releasing OVAs and then going to anime conventions and just like selling them. And the only reason they got here was through like bootlegging at like comic conventions and shit like that. So like that's the only reason why anybody knows this exists outside of like being directed by like one of like the most famous anime directors of all time.
Yeah, it also leads me to believe that some of the translation might have been a little shaky. There are definitely points where it seemed like it was. So I didn't even invest too much in the dialogue specifically when I was watching it, outside of the Noah story, which is pretty clear.
Yeah, like I can't imagine like if you get it wrong, there's like what 4 lines you have to go over.
Yeah, yeah, if you get the basic gist of it, I think you've got it. But if you do have the ability to check it out, I would definitely recommend it if you have like an hour and 10 minutes to spare to look at something pretty cool.
Just don't walk into this expecting like a big action story or anything. This is more like watching like moving paintings or something.
Yeah, if you enjoy the art of animation, I think you'd get a kick out of it regardless. But I think that brings us to the end of this particular topic. As always, make sure to check us out on all your social media. Just type in Dissecting Fiction. There's pretty much no place you can't find. If you go on Google, just type in Dissecting Fiction. We're like every listing on that page now. It's awesome. We do produce a good amount of content every month, so keep tabs on that by subscribing, liking, everything you can do. Be sure to check out ToyStoreGuide.com. You want to support any of these local toy stores that you can, comic book shops as well. Tough time for them, and they almost all offer some sort of internet service. I'm Vinny Murphy.
I'm Christiaan Kutlik.
And thanks for listening.